Okay. I want to bring up one other term, and then we'll stop. Okay? So we started off talking about what is to become a tzaddik. Sur mera va'asetov. Now we've spent a lot of time talking about Tumah and Tahara, which is a state of being in a spiritual way that either allows connection or prevents connection. Okay? There's another term we have to talk about. What is Kadosh? Kadosh is Nivdal. Well, the Metzorah is also Nivdal. Badad yeshev muchutz lamahaneh. So what's the difference between the Metzorah, who is Badad Yeshev because he's Tameh, because people who are Tameh, we talked about there are degrees of separation, right? A woman, when she's Nidah, she has to separate from her husband. So we understand that Tumah and Tahara also talk about a disconnection or an establishment of a connection. So what is Kadosh? You have to be Tahor in order to be Kadosh. The Kohen is Kadosh, even when he's Tameh. Okay, let's understand it like this way. What is the opposite of Kadosh? Chol. What is Chol? Is Chol negative? No. Chol is not negative. There's nothing negative about Monday. Right? Tumah and Tahara are opposites. I'm not saying Tameh is negative from a physical point of view, but there's a negativity from a spiritual point of view. Tahor is a positive from a spiritual point of view. When you're looking at Kadosh, the opposite of Kadosh is Chol. Chol is not necessarily negative. Monday is Monday because it's not Kadosh. Something is Chol when it's not invested with Kedusha. So Kedusha is basically something that you are invested with. It's not necessarily a state of being. It is something, it's a condition that you create that allows you to be invested with something special. So you said the Jewish people are Kedoshim. Why are the Jewish people Kedoshim? Because we have Neshama. Gentiles also have a soul. The word soul in English is not the same as Neshama. Neshama is the highest, well, not the highest, but is a higher level of soul. That is only Jews. Gentiles have Ruach and Gentiles have Nefesh. But they don't have Neshama. So every Jew is invested with the Neshama, and the Neshama, even though we say Tehorahi, it's Tehorah, of course it's Tehorah, it does not become Tameh, but also that investing of the Jew with the Neshama is Kadosh. So Kedusha, Kohen, why is it Kohen Kadosh? Because he's invested with something special called Kehuna. So, Tum'ah and Tahara, you can do things that will change your state directly. With Kedusha, you prepare yourself to be receiving holiness, but it has to be given to you. And who gives holiness? Hashem gives holiness. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more next week because we have Parashat Kedoshim. Okay, Rashi says a little bit like you're saying. We're going to try to understand this in a little more detail because the machloka between Rashi and the Ramban, with regarding what is Kedusha. But I'll tell you what the Ramban says short, and maybe we'll talk about this in a little more detail next week. How does a person become Kadosh? Rashi says, separating from Arayot. Right? Separating from Arayot, which means you become Parush. What is Parush? Separated. And it makes sense because the parasha right before Kedoshim is Aharemot. What is Parashat Aharemot talking about? All the forbidden relationships between men and women, men and animals, right? So in order, as she says, in order to become Kadosh, a person has to be Parush, which means to be separate, designated. The Ramban says, no. If a person is not involving themselves in arayot, then they're a tzaddik. Doesn't mean they're a kadosh. Right, what did we say from the beginning of the class? How does a person become tzaddik? Sur mera va'aseh tov. If a person is involving themselves in ra, they're rasha. If a person is avoiding things that are bad, avoiding arayot, then he's a tzaddik. How does that mean he becomes Kadosh? So Ramban says the way a person becomes Kadosh is by restricting yourself from things that are permitted to you. Restricting yourself from things that are asur, that are forbidden, doesn't make you Kadosh. It makes you a tzaddik. But restricting yourself from something that is permitted to you, that's what makes you Kadosh. And then if we think about that and we apply that in the Torah, we understand something. For instance, Eved Ivri. People talk about the Torah and say, oh my God, it's so old-fashioned. Look at this, it talks about slavery. How can the Torah be so backward that it talks about slavery? Ki tikne Eved Ivri. Yes? Are you obligated to have Eved Ivri? No one obligates you. You are permitted to take Eved Ivri. If a person doesn't take Eved Ivri, maybe that's the way to become Kadosh. Maybe instead of, again, there's some benefits being Eved Ivri, so that's not such a good example. Let me give you another example. Is there any prohibition in the Torah for having meat for breakfast, meat for lunch, and meat for dinner? Let's just put aside cholesterol and heart disease and all that kind of stuff. Is there any prohibition in the Torah? You have basar halak for breakfast, you have basar halak for lunch, you have basar halak for dinner, and you do that every single day. And in addition to that, you also drink yain. Yain for breakfast, yain for lunch, and yain for dinner. Wine. Wine. Now, I can make a great argument. We know that yain and basar bring simha. And simha ela basar vayain. Basar is meat and yain is wine. Why shouldn't a person want to be sameh at breakfast? Why should a person want to be sameh at lunch? Why shouldn't a person want to be sameh at dinner? Let's put aside health. Let's just make sure that we don't know anything about the past 30, 40 years and that these things are not healthy for you. That's the key, what Rachel said. Ta'ava. Why are you having meat and wine for breakfast? Why are you having meat and wine for lunch? Why are you having meat and wine for dinner? Ta'avahu la'enayim. Where do we remember that? Where did we hear that before? Chava. When the Nahash went to Chava, what did he say to her? He told her to eat from the tree. And what did she recognize? V'chi hu ta'ava la'enayim. That the tree was a ta'ava for the einayim. V'tikach min ha'etz v'tochal. So we see Kedusha is connected to ta'ava. But how? There are times when a person is supposed to have meat and wine. Shabbat. Yom Tov, required to have meat and wine. However, samachta b'hagecha. Many of the Rishonim say, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of samachta b'hagecha, if you're a man, you have to have yain and basar. You have to have meat and wine. If you're a woman, your husband has to buy you fancy clothing and nice and jewelry before the holiday, because that's what makes women generally happy, not meat and wine. But men, you give them a steak, you give them a nice thing of wine, ala esh, we're good to go. Okay? So meaning what? So the key here, what makes Kedusha? when you are not run by your ta'avot, but instead you are the master of your ta'avot. Now, a person who's run by his ta'avot can be a rasha. He wants to have relations with every woman that walks by. So he's a rasha. Because he's a slave to his ta'avot. That's a very low level. But even if a person has things that the Torah gives you a lot of leeway. We think the Torah is so restrictive. A person can drink wine and eat meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. There's no isur from the Torah for that. There's no isur from the Torah for the person to get drunk 3 times a day. As long as he's sober and he does daf yomi before, then he could, as long as he's sober by the times for davening, it's no problem. It's not no problem, it's a big problem. But we know this is called menuval birshut HaTorah, which means the Torah gives us leeway. Why did God give us leeway? Because he wants us to be kadoshim. And how does a person, according to the Ramban, become kadosh? By putting restrictions on yourself of things that are permitted to you. Things that are forbidden to you, you don't have an option. God put the restriction on you. It's almost like Hashem says, this is the minimum. This is what I want you to do. This is how you get in the ball game. This is how you get to be a tzaddik. But you want to be a kadosh. Now you have to restrict yourself from things that are permitted to you. But that doesn't mean you never enjoy meat. We're not supposed to be prushim, living in the mountains as hermits and separating ourselves. The nivdalim, this is badad yeshem mi'utz la'mahaneh. These are the shayim that do that. A person has to be governing their ta'avot, the master of their ta'avot, of their desires. So this way, in appropriate times, they're allowed to enjoy from the world. There's no isur for a man and a woman not to be enjoying from the world. As long as they are the master of their ta'avot. Baal Teshuvah, yes, so good. I mean, he's the master of Teshuvah. Very nice. Very nice. So that's a little bit of a flavor. What is Kedoshim to you? Yes?
The opposite of ta'ava is tzanut.
Opposite of ta'ava. What's the opposite of desire? I don't know. The opposite of tsanua is parutz.
Maybe humbleness.
Again, I don't know about modern Hebrew. I'm talking about rabbinic Hebrew. A person who is not tsanua is prutzim, which means they are exposed. The concept of tzniut is a little different. The concept of tzniut is, I have something special. I have respect for myself. And because I have respect for myself and I have something special, I'm not sharing that with everybody. I'm going to share that with one person. For instance, a person, everybody, when they take off their clothes, is naked. Everybody, everybody's got the same body, some bigger, some smaller, but the bottom line is we're all the same, right? Different proportions, different sizes, right? Walking outside without clothes on is pritzut. Because you're exposing things that are supposed to be hidden. Why does a person expose things that are supposed to be hidden? Usually it's because of lack of self-respect.
So all the nudists, they have.
Huh?
So all the nudists, or those who believe.
They're trying to be poretz geder.
Like Adam and Eve?
They're trying to break the fence. There's certain fence in our society today. There's a huge problem. Okay, there's all kinds of fences that society had in place to prevent behavior from declining to the point where we behave like animals. Over the past 15, 20, 30 years, there's things that have happened. I'm talking about in Western civilization, and I'm talking about in the United States. There are things that have gone to a point where there are certain fences that existed 10 years ago that have already been destroyed. That's pritzut. Poretz gader yinshachenu nahash. A person who breaks through the fence gets bitten by the snake, which means when you break the fence, what happens? You sin. Okay? That's why Rashi says Kadoshim is when a person has geder, I didn't use that word, but Rashi did. It's correct, I'm sorry I didn't bring it out. Geder arayot, which means he makes a fence around the arayot. Because when you take down the fence, that becomes pritzut. So the opposite of tsanua, which means modest, which means you hide what is private. There are things that are public, your face. False modesty would require you to cover your face. And generally the things that you're hiding are things that are private. What makes it private? The fact that everybody has the same. Some big, some small, but it's all the same. Face, nobody's face is the same as someone else's face. Except for identical twins. And even identical twins, there's some slight differences. Usually the parents can tell the difference. A face, since it's unique to you, that is not something you have to hide. What you hide are things that are common to everyone. Just because a person has dressed of sanua doesn't necessarily mean he's controlling his ta'avot. So that's the difference between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi is saying that the physical world is problematic. And a person should restrict themselves from the physical world. What is the Ramban saying? Kedoshim to you, which means hope, and again, the tzaddikim that you're talking about do that a little as well. They restrict themselves from what is permitted to them. But that doesn't mean they have no ta'ava.
Yes.
Okay? Now, there are some people who choose to live and conquer all their ta'avot, and that is a way of living. This is not, again, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lusato, okay? He would say that that's not the way to live in life. And the example would be, we could bring simply, is the Nazir. The Nazir, right, what does he do? He makes a swear that he's not going to drink wine. He's not going to have grapes, right? Not going to have raisins. Minimum of 30 days. What sacrifice does he have to bring when his Nazirut is finished? He has to bring Korban Hatat. He has to bring a sin offering. Nazirut is a higher way of living. It's a restriction from wine and grapes. And why does he do that? Because he sees what happens with the sotah. That's what Rashi says. He sees the sotah when she is messed up, right, in the Bet HaMikdash. And right away he makes a ned that he's not going to drink wine. Because what leads a person to behave like that? Right? When two people are nervous and they want to do something they shouldn't do together. How do they relax a little bit? How do they break down the barriers? A little bit of alcohol. A little bit of alcohol, what that does is breaks down the barriers, relaxes the person, and makes you able to do things that normally your mind would say you shouldn't do, but takes down the barriers and makes you less inhibited. Being inhibited is not bad. Okay? But the Nazir has to bring chatat. Why? Because he restricted himself from things that were permitted to him. Okay? The Nazir doesn't drink wine on Shabbat. Now, a person might say, you know what? I'm not going to have meat during the week. I'm going to save it for Shabbat. I'm not going to drink wine during the week. I'm going to save it for Shabbat. And even these tzaddikim that you're talking about, chances are, on Shabbat, they allow themselves. But what's the difference? They are the master of their ta'ava. Because they're not having 6 days a week, but on Shabbat they are. As opposed to the Nazir, 30 days includes 4 Shabbat. And that's the minimum. If he does it for a year, that's 52 Shabbat. What does he do on Pesach? What does he do on Shavuot? He can't have wine. Okay? So, and that is not the ideal way to live. There are certain circumstances when a person may have to do that, but to recognize that's not what the ideal is. The ideal is for a person to be moshel. The person should be ruling over their ta'avot, so the ta'avot don't control them, but they control the ta'avot. And in those situations, when they're controlling the ta'avot, it is kadosh to enjoy from the world, as long as the person puts proper limitations on what is permitted. Okay? Any other questions on what we talked about? Okay, so we're going to learn today. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.